The bus stop light flickered above me, casting uneven shadows across the empty bench. Rain had started 15 minutes ago. Soft at first, then heavier until my jacket clung to my shoulders and my hair dripped into my eyes. I checked my phone again. No messages. The street stretched empty in both directions, glistening black under the streetlights, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the low rumble of an approaching bus. He said he'd be here by 8. It was nearly 9. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts, but I didn't press it. Pride, maybe, or something deeper, a quiet certainty that if I had to ask him to care, then the answer was already written in his absence. The rain fell harder, drumming against the metal shelter, and I pulled my knees closer to my chest, watching headlights pass by without slowing, watching couples hurry past under shared umbrellas, watching the world move forward while I sat frozen in this moment, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss. The driver looked at me through the rain-streaked windshield, patient but expectant. I glanced down the empty street one more time. Nothing, just darkness and rain and the hollow echo of my own breathing. I stood up. My legs felt heavy like they were moving through water. I climbed the steps, paid the fare and found a seat near the back. Through the window, I watched the bus stop disappear behind us, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light in the distance. He would arrive eventually, I knew. He would stand there in the rain, looking at the empty bench, and for the first time in our 3 years together, I wouldn't be there waiting. The thought should have hurt more than it did. We met in college, in a literature class neither of us wanted to take. He sat behind me and spent the first week dropping pens, bumping my chair, making small jokes until I finally turned around and laughed. That laugh felt like permission, like the beginning of something I'd been waiting for without knowing. He was charming in the careless way that some people are, effortlessly funny, always surrounded by friends, the kind of person who made you feel special just by noticing you existed. I fell quickly. Too quickly, maybe. But it felt right at the time. The way he'd text me good morning before I was awake. The way he'd grab my hand in crowded hallways like he was afraid of losing me. My parents loved him immediately. My mother would set an extra place at dinner, even when he hadn't confirmed he was coming, and my father would laugh at his jokes a beat too long, eager and approving. Even my sister, Mia, beautiful, perfect Mia with her medical degree and her perfect boyfriend and her perfect life, would smile at him across the table and say things like, "You're good for her, she needs someone stable." Stable. As if I were a structure in danger of collapse. But I didn't mind. Not then. Because he made me feel seen in a way I'd never felt before. My family had always treated me like the practice daughter, the rough draft before they perfected their parenting with Mia. She was 3 years older, 3 inches taller, 3 times more successful in every measurable way. When she graduated summa cum laude from medical school, my parents threw a party for 50 people. When I graduated with honours in art history, my mother baked a cake and forgot to write my name on it. "Congratulations on your achievement," it said in swirled frosting. Generic, reusable. But with him, I thought I'd found someone who saw past all that. Someone who chose me first, not as a consolation or an afterthought, but as the main event. I built my world around that belief. I rearranged my schedule to match his. I learned to love the music he liked, watched the shows he recommended, ordered the food he preferred. When he wanted to move across the city for a better job, I followed, leaving my small studio apartment and my carefully cultivated routine. When his friends came over at midnight, unannounced, I made them food and laughed at their inside jokes, even though I didn't understand them. When he forgot my birthday, I reminded myself that he was stressed with work. When he forgot again the next year, I told myself that dates were just arbitrary numbers anyway. The pattern started small, a cancelled dinner here, a forgotten promise there. He'd apologise with that crooked smile, the one that used to make my heart race, and I'd forgive him because what else could I do? Love means understanding, I told myself, Love means patience, but patience has a breaking point, even if you don't recognize it until you've already crossed it. The bus hummed beneath me, carrying me through neighborhoods I barely recognized. Office buildings gave way to residential streets, then industrial complexes, then stretches of darkness punctuated by the occasional gas station or all-night diner. I pressed my forehead against the cool window and watched my reflection superimposed over the passing landscape. A ghost moving through the world. Barely there. 6 months ago, I'd gotten a promotion at the gallery where I worked. It wasn't much, a coordinator position, more responsibility than pay, but it felt like proof that I existed outside of his orbit. I'd worked late every night for 2 weeks to prepare for my first major exhibition, a collection by a local artist whose work explored themes of isolation and belonging. The opening night fell on a Friday, and I'd bought a new dress, something deep emerald that made me feel confident and visible. "You're coming, right?" I asked him that morning, laying out the details again even though we'd discussed it a dozen times. "Of course," he said, not looking up from his phone. "I promised, didn't I?" But 7 o'clock came and went. 8 o'clock. By 9, the gallery was full of people admiring the paintings, sipping wine, asking me questions about the artist's technique and inspiration, and I answered them all with a smile that felt like it was carved from stone. My boss pulled me aside and squeezed my shoulder. "This is wonderful, Olivia. You should be proud." But all I could think about was the empty space beside me where he should have been standing. He showed up at 10:30, just as people were leaving. His tie was loosened, his hair messy, and he smelled like whiskey and someone else's perfume. "Sorry, babe, work thing ran late. You know how it is." I did know. I knew because it wasn't the first time, or the 5th, or the 10th. I knew because I'd learned to expect disappointment the way some people expect sunrise. Inevitable, natural, just another fact of existence. But I smiled anyway. "It's fine," I said, and the lie tasted like ash. Mia had been there that night. She'd driven 2 hours from her practice upstate to attend, standing beside her fiancé Adrian with her hand tucked perfectly into the crook of his elbow. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Both tall, both beautiful, both radiating the kind of effortless success that seemed to follow them everywhere. My mother had come too, though she spent most of the evening talking to Mia about wedding plans and asking Adrian about his latest research. My father had shaken my hand awkwardly, the way he always did, when he didn't know what else to offer, and left after 20 minutes. "This is nice," my mother had said, glancing around at the paintings with polite disinterest. "Small, but nice." Mia had been kinder. "You did this all yourself? That's impressive, Liv." But even her praise felt comparative, as if she were grading my achievement against some invisible rubric where her successes were always the benchmark. And then he arrived, late and unapologetic, and my mother's face had lit up. "There he is! We were wondering where you'd disappeared to." She kissed his cheek like he was her own son, and he charmed her the way he charmed everyone, making excuses that sounded almost reasonable, almost forgivable. My father clapped him on the shoulder. Mia smiled indulgently. Adrian raised his wineglass in a small salute. And I stood there, watching my family welcome him like a conquering hero while my own accomplishment faded into the background, a set piece in someone else's story. That night, lying beside him in bed, I'd felt it for the first time. The certainty that I was living in the wrong narrative. That somewhere along the way I'd become a supporting character in my own life, and everyone around me had helped write the script that kept me there. But I didn't leave. Not then. Because leaving would have required me to admit that I'd been wrong. That I'd wasted 3 years on someone who saw me as optional. And I wasn't ready for that truth yet. So, I stayed. Through more missed dinners, more forgotten plans, more nights when he'd come home late, smelling like everywhere but home. I stayed through the arguments that went nowhere, through his promises that meant nothing, through the slow erosion of whatever we'd once been. I stayed because staying was easier than facing the emptiness that waited on the other side of leaving. Until tonight. Tonight was supposed to be different. We'd planned it carefully. Dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, followed by a walk through the park, just the two of us. No work, no friends, no distractions, just us trying to remember what that meant. "I'll meet you at the bus stop at 8, he'd said that morning. "The one by your office? We'll go together." I'd believed him. Despite everything, I'd believed him. But 8 o'clock came, and he didn't. 8:15, 8:30. I'd texted him twice, called once. Nothing. Just the rain and the cold and the slow, dawning realization that I was exactly where I'd always been. Alone, waiting, hoping for someone who would never arrive. The difference was, this time, I didn't wait. The bus driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing stops I'd never heard of. I had no idea where this route ended, and I didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't planning my next move around his schedule, his needs, his convenience. I was just moving, letting momentum carry me forward into whatever came next. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw his name on the screen. "Where are you? I'm at the bus stop." I stared at the message for a long moment, watching the read receipt appear beneath it. I could picture him there, standing in the rain, confused and annoyed, expecting me to materialize because I always did. I always came back. I always forgave. I always stayed. I turned off my phone. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a dream where I'd forgotten how to breathe. I moved out of our apartment while he was at work, taking only what was mine and leaving behind everything that belonged to us. The books we'd bought together, the furniture we'd chosen, the photographs on the wall. I left it all because holding onto those pieces would mean carrying the weight of who I'd been with him, and I needed to be lighter now. Freer. I stayed with a friend from work, sleeping on her couch and rebuilding myself piece by piece. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped crafting my schedule around someone else's availability. I started going to galleries alone, spending hours studying paintings without having to explain what I saw in them. I took a pottery class on Thursday evenings just because I wanted to, not because it fit into anyone else's plan. He called. He texted. He showed up at the gallery once, standing outside in the rain like some tragic romantic hero, but I didn't go to him. I watched from the window and I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no regret. Just a profound relief that I was no longer responsible for managing his emotions or explaining myself. My mother called too, eventually. "What happened between you two? He seemed so hurt." Of course he did. Of course she'd spoken to him first, gotten his version of events, taken his pain more seriously than my silence. "We weren't right for each other," I said simply. "But he was so good to you, and you were so happy together." I almost laughed. Happy. As if she'd been paying attention. As if she'd noticed the way I'd shrunk myself down to fit into the spaces between everyone else's needs. "I wasn't happy, Mum. I was convenient." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought she might actually hear me. But then, "Well, Mia's wedding is in 3 months. I assume you'll come alone?" There it was, the pivot back to Mia, to safety, to the daughter who did everything right. "I'll be there," I said, and ended the call. The wedding invitation arrived 6 weeks later, thick cardstock embossed with gold lettering. Mia and Adrian, surrounded by elegant script promising an evening of celebration and joy. I studied my sister's name, trying to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation, one that wasn't about her achievements or my failures. I couldn't, but I RSVP'd yes anyway. Not because I wanted to go, but because some part of me needed to prove that I could stand in that room, surrounded by my family and their expectations. and remain myself. The months passed quickly, filled with work and pottery classes and long walks through the city. I got promoted again, this time to assistant curator. My boss, a woman in her 50s who wore bold scarves and took no nonsense from anyone, pulled me aside one afternoon. "You're different lately," she said. "More present. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I was doing nothing except existing on my own terms. It was revolutionary. The wedding fell on a Saturday in early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn, and the air carried that particular crispness that promised change. I drove upstate alone, taking my time, stopping at a small cafe for coffee and arriving at the venue exactly when I intended to. Not early enough to help, not late enough to cause concern, just precisely on time, occupying exactly as much space as I chose to. The venue was beautiful, of course. Everything about Mia's life was beautiful. The ceremony took place in a garden overlooking a lake, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows and flowers in shades of blush and ivory everywhere I looked. My mother stood near the entrance, directing people with the efficiency of a general, and my father hovered nearby, looking vaguely uncomfortable in his tuxedo. "Olivia," my mother spotted me immediately. "You're here. Alone?" "Yes," I said simply, not offering explanation or apology. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but a crisis with the catering pulled her away, and I slipped into the crowd of guests, anonymous and unbothered. The ceremony was perfect. Mia looked stunning in her dress. Adrian looked appropriately emotional, and my parents beamed with pride so tangible it filled the space like additional guests. I sat near the back, watching it all unfold with a strange sense of distance, as if I were observing someone else's family, someone else's story. During the reception, I found myself at a table with distant cousins I barely knew, which suited me fine. I ate the carefully prepared meal, sipped champagne that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and watched my parents dance with Mia and Adrian, their joy so complete it seemed to exclude the possibility of anything else existing in the world. I felt nothing. No jealousy, no resentment, no longing to be seen the way they saw her. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we were different people, my sister and I, and that difference didn't diminish me the way I'd once believed. I was finishing my dessert when I saw him. He stood near the bar, talking to someone I didn't recognise, wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to every formal event we'd attended together. My first instinct was to leave, to slip away before he noticed me. But then something stopped me. Not fear, I was surprised to realise I wasn't afraid of him, wasn't afraid of what he might say or how he might make me feel. I felt nothing but a mild curiosity about why he was here. Then I saw her, Mia. She walked up to him, touched his arm, laughed at something he said. They looked comfortable together, familiar. And suddenly I understood. He'd been invited as Mia's guest. Or maybe as Adrian's colleague. Or maybe as someone my parents had included because they still held hope that I'd change my mind, come crawling back, restore the order they preferred. I watched them for a moment longer, this tableau of my former life, and Aisham, I felt the final thread of connection snap. Clean and quiet, complete. He noticed me eventually. Our eyes met across the reception hall, and I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by something that might have been hope, or might have been calculation. He said something to Mia, then started walking toward me. I stood up, not to meet him, but to leave. I'd already given him 3 years of my life. He wasn't getting another minute. But he was faster. He reached my table just as I gathered my purse. Olivia. He said my name like it was a question, like he was testing whether I'd respond to it. Hello, I said. Polite, distant, the tone you'd use with a stranger. You look good, really good. Thank you. The silence stretched between us. He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain, and I realised that he'd expected something different from this encounter. Drama, maybe, tears, Some sign that I was still tethered to him, still defined by his absence. "I tried to call you," he said finally. "A lot." "I know." "Why didn't you answer?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone I barely recognized. Not because he'd changed, but because I had. The man who'd once seemed so essential now appeared exactly as he was, ordinary, self-centered, and I assumed someone who'd never actually seen me at all. Because there was nothing left to say, I told him. His jaw tightened. "That's it? 3 years and you just walk away without a conversation?" "I had that conversation by myself 100 times while you were too busy to show up. I'm not interested in having it again now." "That's not fair, Liv. You're acting like I did something terrible, like I didn't care." "You didn't," I said simply. The words weren't angry or accusatory, just factual. You didn't care. Not the way someone should care about a partner. And I let you not care because I thought that was what I deserved, but I was wrong. He opened his mouth to argue, but I was already moving past him, walking toward the exit with steady, unhurried steps. I heard him call my name once more, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing behind me that I needed to see. Outside, the evening air was cool and clear. I stood on the steps of the venue, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of 3 years lift from my shoulders like a physical thing. My phone buzzed. Probably my mother, wondering where I'd gone, why I was leaving early. But I silenced it without checking. I'd driven here alone, and I'd drive home alone. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that fact felt like freedom rather than failure. The drive back to the city took 2 hours. I played music I liked, stopped when I wanted to stop, took detours that led nowhere in particular. By the time I reached my apartment, my own apartment now, a small studio with plants on the windowsill and artwork I'd chosen myself, it was nearly midnight. I made tea, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. My phone screen showed a dozen notifications, but I didn't open them. They could wait. Everything could wait. Tomorrow, I'd go to the gallery. I'd work on the new exhibition I was curating, a collection by a young artist whose paintings explored themes of identity and self-discovery. I'd have lunch with my friend from the pottery class. I'd go home to my own space, my own life, my own carefully constructed piece. And somewhere across the city, he would wake up in whatever bed he'd found, and maybe he'd think of me. Maybe he'd realise what he'd lost, what he'd taken for granted. Maybe he'd understand that the quiet girl who'd always waited for him had finally stopped waiting. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd tell himself a story where he was the victim, where I was the one who'd walked away for no reason, where nothing was ever his fault. It didn't matter, either way. His story about me couldn't touch me anymore. Weeks turned into months. The exhibition opened to strong reviews, and my name appeared in the local arts magazine, alongside words like insightful and promising. I got invited to speak on a panel about emerging voices in curation. I made new friends, people who knew me only as I was now, unburdened by who I'd been. My mother called occasionally, always with the same underlying theme: concern masked as conversation, disappointment disguised as worry. "You're really not going to give him another chance? He's asked about you. He seems to have learned his lesson." "Good for him," I'd say. "I hope he applies those lessons to his next relationship." Mia called once, about 3 months after her wedding. "Mom said you and he talked at the reception. She said you were cold to him." I was honest with him. "He's been having a hard time, Liv. Adrian says he's really struggling with the breakup." "Then maybe he should have tried harder when we were together." A pause. Then, "Do you really not care at all, after everything you two had?" "What we had was an imbalance, Buckshort," I said quietly. "And I spent 3 years trying to balance it alone. I'm not responsible for his feelings about that now." She didn't call again after that. Spring came, then summer, I took a week off work and visited a friend in Portland, spending my days exploring bookstores and coffee shops, my evenings watching the sunset from her apartment balcony. No schedule but my own, no obligations but the ones I chose. It was during that trip, sitting in a small gallery in the Pearl District, that I saw a painting that stopped me cold. It depicted a woman standing at a bus stop, rain falling around her, one hand reaching toward an empty space beside her. But her face was turned away from that emptiness, looking instead toward a bus pulling away in the distance, its taillights glowing red in the darkness. The title card read, "The Moment Between." I stared at it for 20 minutes, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not sadness, exactly. More like recognition. The artist had captured something essential about transformation, how it happens in these small, unremarkable moments when you choose movement over waiting, uncertainty over stagnation, yourself over someone else's version of who you should be. I bought the painting. It was expensive, more than I should have spent, but I didn't care. I needed it the way some people need talismans or prayers. When I got back to the city, I hung it in my living room where I could see it every morning when I woke up. A reminder, a promise, a testament to the moment I'd chosen myself. Autumn returned, completing the circle of a year without him. The gallery where I worked hosted an opening for a new exhibition, and I stood in the centre of the room, surrounded by art and conversation, and people who knew my work, respected my vision, saw me as complete rather than lacking. I was standing near a sculpture, discussing its composition with a collector, when I felt someone's eyes on me. I turned and saw him across the room. He'd come with someone else, a woman I didn't recognise, younger than me, laughing at something he'd said. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. Our eyes met, and this time I didn't look away. I let him see what I'd become without him, confident, successful, whole. I let him see the version of myself I'd discovered in his absence, the person I'd always been underneath the accommodations and compromises. I saw the recognition flicker across his face, saw the regret chase it immediately after, saw him understand, finally, what he'd lost by never truly seeing me when he had the chance. Then I turned back to my conversation, dismissing him as effortlessly as he'd once dismissed me. The collector was asking about the artist's inspiration, and I had answers, insights, expertise worth sharing. I had work to do, a life to live, a self to be. He just stayed at the opening for another hour, hovering at the edges of my peripheral vision. But he never approached me, never tried to speak. And when I finally looked toward where he'd been standing, he was gone. The woman he'd brought with him too, just empty space where they'd stood, already forgotten. The night ended well. My boss toasted the success of the exhibition, thanking me by name for my contribution. Colleagues congratulated me. Strangers asked for my card. I floated home on a wave of accomplishment that was entirely my own, built by my own hands, earned by my own work. In my apartment, I made tea and sat in my usual spot by the window. The city glittered below, each light representing someone's story, someone's struggle, someone's triumph. I thought about the girl who had sat at that bus stop a year ago, soaked through with rain and disappointment, waiting for someone who would never arrive. She'd been so afraid then, afraid of being alone, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being exactly who she was without anyone to validate her existence. But she'd been brave enough to board that bus, brave enough to choose movement over paralysis, loneliness over diminishment, truth over comfortable lies, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I saw you tonight. You were right about everything. I'm sorry I couldn't see it before." I read it twice, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no desire to respond. His apology was about him, for him, a way to ease his own conscience. It had nothing to do with me. I deleted the message and blocked the number. Outside, a bus passed on the street below, its interior lights glowing warm against the darkness. I watched it until it disappeared around a corner, carrying its passengers toward destinations unknown. Some of them were probably going home. Some were probably running away. Some were probably just riding, letting motion be its own purpose. All of them were moving forward. I set down my tea and picked up the sketchbook I'd started keeping. Another new habit. Another piece of myself I was reclaiming. I drew the bus stop from memory, rain and shadows, and a single figure standing alone. But in my drawing, my figure wasn't waiting. She was walking away, shoulders straight, head high, moving towards something instead of away from something. At the bottom of the page, I wrote 3 words. She left first. Not because it was revenge, not because it was punishment, but because it was truth. I'd left first, not in the physical sense, though I'd done that too, but in the deeper way that mattered. I'd left the version of myself who believed she needed him to be complete. I'd left the story where I was always supporting cast, never the lead. I'd left the girl who waited in the rain, and in leaving, I'd arrived at myself. The night deepened, but I wasn't tired. I made more tea, opened my laptop, and started drafting plans for my next project. A solo exhibition, maybe. Something personal. Something about transformation and becoming. About the distance between who we are and who we allow ourselves to be. Something about bus stops and rain and the courage it takes to move when everything in you wants to freeze. I worked until dawn, the words and images flowing easily, finally, and when the sun rose over the city, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility, I was still there, still creating, still becoming. Somewhere across the city, he was probably sleeping, probably dreaming, probably believing he'd been the one who'd made a choice that night at the bus stop. But I knew different. I knew that the real choice hadn't been his to make at all. The real choice had been mine in that moment when I'd stood up, boarded the bus, and chosen forward motion over stagnation. I'd chosen myself over his maybes, and some days and broken promises. And I would choose myself again, every day, for the rest of my life. The bus had carried me away from who I'd been. But more importantly, it had carried me toward who I was always meant to become. Not his girlfriend, not my family's afterthought, not anyone's second choice or consolation prize. Just Olivia, complete, uncompromising, finally free. And that freedom, hard-won, quietly earned, entirely my own, was worth every moment I'd spent in the rain.